Wonderful. Well, we are talking about technology automation, and industry today. And I think this is a really important and exciting topic. I'd like the panel members to introduce themselves. I'll start with myself. My name is Sarah Hindlian, and I cover enterprise software at Macquarie. And I'm very focused on all of these really important trends, and that they typically involve a layer of software. Certainly IoT is one of those, where you're talking about connected devices, where you're talking about automation, where you're talking about layers of both software, networking, and hardware. So we have a diverse array of people on the panel who can talk to these various trends today. And with that, why don't you introduce yourself?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for kicking us off, Sarah. I'm Judd Leidheiser. I'm a partner here at March Capital in Los Angeles. It was great to hear our prior panelists as Angelino and hear what they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm also happy to kind of introduce, Harry and Michael here. These guys are true regimes of change. As we talk about industrial software, industrial automation, what that could represent. It's a $1 trillion market. I think we're very much at the early innings. I think there's a rapid series of catalysts on the horizon that are coming up. And these two gentlemen, have between them kind of a $250 billion in market value at their respective companies. So excited to hear what they have to say, and we'll turn it over to Harry.
So my name is Harry Diarte. I run Schneider Electric Ventures. It's a 500 million euro fund, stage agnostic investing. One of our topics is, we call it Industry 5.0, because we care not only about efficiency, but also the circular economy, making a more sustainable supply chains. And we also have, we're a modern CVC. We have Kerry, and we have a partnership team to make the links between the portfolio companies and the big mothership of Schneider to support our portfolio companies go to market and in other ways.
I'm Mike Lohnert, Managing Director, Boeing HorizonX Ventures. We invest across several thematics. We have about 25 investments in our portfolio. We run accelerators globally as well. So happy to be here.
And so, Sarah, maybe you can frame the conversation a little bit. We have a few topics here: technology, automation, industry 4.0. It's probably a lot for people to process. Can you talk a little bit about just what that means? Like, are we talking about what verticals, what potential, what kind of use cases?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's important to think about what inning we're in terms of how far along we are. And so, in many ways, I think we're in the early innings, let's say third or fourth. And so what we're seeing right now is a lot of industrial companies focusing on managing their connected devices, and we're seeing a lot more of it in manufacturing as well. And the idea here is really, and I'm going to make it as simple as possible, the idea here really is things that used to be manually managed or by individuals. And I like to use an example. I have a company that I speak with regularly, a big energy company in Texas. And when they decided to make the oil rig openings intelligent and connected, automated devices, this completely changed their ability to respond to the kind of things that they need to respond to. For example, a bad weather event happened, and they needed to batten down the hatches. Traditionally, they would need to send out individuals in vehicles to go to all of those fields and ensure that this is done. With connected devices, they're now able, in automation, they're now able to do that from a remote location. So this is extraordinarily powerful in terms of speeding time to problem resolution, saving potential lost revenues, and dealing with a number of problems. And I think it's very, very early today in terms of connected and automated machines and intelligence. But I do believe we will get to the point where not only do we have to start to think about what we can connect, what networks they're on, how much CPU they need, but how do we protect these devices as well? All of these are still coming down the pathway in terms of where we are, in my view, of this massive, massive change in trend.
And Mike, would you agree with that? Where are we kind of in the curve? We talk a lot about here technology innovation. Where are we on the hype cycle? How early is it in kind of this industrial trend?
Oh, we are definitely starting on the uptick, I'd say. We're past the hype. We are definitely seeing IoT picking up in the connected devices out in remote areas. Simple things like tracking cattle and knowing where your cattle are with IoT comms devices. In the factory floor, as was mentioned, sustainability. How do you reduce waste by not having to hog out as much material by using additive manufacturing and understanding when to implement those and things like that. And then bringing in all the software piece about maintenance and how do you optimize your machines so you don't need to purchase extra machines. So we're definitely getting there, especially with the added capabilities around edge compute and able to push some of that compute of those algorithms to the edge where they need to be in real time.
Yeah, I would just want to add on to that, if you wouldn't mind, that we're definitely seeing companies prepared for the emergence of IoT. I mean, I would point to Microsoft, for example, which I do have a buy rating on, but I believe the company is very, very focused on building as many global data centers as they possibly can in as many regions as they can, which is why they're 1 or 2 ahead of AWS today. And when speaking with the company and with Satya Nadella, it's very clear that he believes the closer to the edge he can get and the closer computing power he can bring to these devices, the sooner and the more powerful they will be. And so the tech community is absolutely behind this and bringing more and more robust software solutions right to the edge of where we want to be connecting to these devices.
So let's maybe talk a little bit more about like edge computing. There's a number of industry analysts, business leaders. I think Michael Dell, the head of HPE, and Peter Andreessen Horowitz have all talked about the edge is going to be bigger than the cloud. I think Amazon and Microsoft are sort of interesting because they're playing the edge, but people think, hey, that's just a way for them to get more data in the cloud and more compute and storage and everything associated with that. Where are we kind of at the edge cycle, and who's leading that charge? Is it mostly the cloud providers? Is it mostly kind of the actual customers and manufacturing oil and gas that are using it? Is it startups? Or what's kind of going on there?
Well, I can speak a little bit about that, but one thing that I want to reinforce before that is that I do believe we are at the point, Industry 4.0 is old, but we are at the point that we can now have a real impact, and as investors, we can actually make money with it. It's really at the point where we can do that. On the question on the edge, I'm going to answer with an example. We're partnering with a company that, and the important thing is not that you have all these connected devices, but what can you do with them? And everybody talks about AI, yeah, AI, but what is the application that creates value? I'm going to give you an example that is on the edge. There's a company that has to install 1 sensor per rig because they don't have all the data that they need, but with that extra sensor, they have a computer on the edge that actually takes over actuating the pressure pumps and everything that you actuate in an oil rig. And the result of that is that they produce between 8 to 20% more oil per day from that rig. That is huge. That is real value.
Astronomical.
So this is really happening today. So it's coming of age, and they're doing it on the edge. It's all computing on the edge. There's nothing on the cloud. The edge revolution, it is at the moment driven by startups, but the cloud providers like Google and Microsoft are beginning to try to buy these companies. Some of the companies we have invested, they've tried to buy them because they see the trend. Because you cannot, it's not sustainable to send everything to the cloud. Because data center energy consumption that today is 12% of all energy consumption is going to grow to 24%. That is a huge footprint. That cannot continue. The traffic is crazy. So if you process it at the edge, you can actually have the benefit that you were intended to if you process it at the edge, and you just send the relevant information, which is a fraction of that, to the cloud to keep the historian. So the edge revolution is happening. It's still early. That's why it's still being driven by startups. But I think the big companies have woken up that this is going to happen, and they don't have it in-house, so they're trying to partner or acquire it outside.
And the thing I'd add is, too often people, when you think about IoT, people think of a little sensor, right? So Boeing you can extend that to a platform at the edge. So an autonomous car can produce terabytes of data a day. An airplane can produce terabytes of data a day. No matter with Wi-Fi or 5G, you are not getting all that data off that platform. So you need to be able to compute it in real time, use what you need to use, and then we can take it at a depot or something and take the actual data off and rerun your algos and push them back. Then you're starting to get that edge compute, cloud hybrid give and take.
Right.
And it's really the costs also that keep people from, not only is it the slowness as we're, still waiting on 5G to really ramp, but it's also the cost of sending all that data to the cloud to be processed. It can be astronomical. So that's why I think edge is so important.
And Harry, can you maybe define for the audience, like, what's brownfield versus greenfield? And we say, like, edge computing, particularly for kind of the fixed asset base of, you mentioned a lot of the oil and gas or manufacturing. What are the steps there? Is it doing something at the network layer? Is it actually, putting a chip on the device themselves? Like, how do we get kind of to that edge computing paradigm?
Well, it depends, because sometimes it depends on where you are on your digitization roadmap. If you already have a lot of sensors and data coming to a central database, whether you have it on the cloud or on-prem, you might only need a software layer and maybe a couple of devices to do the compute on site. But if you don't have that, then you need to install sensors, and you need to install a whole infrastructure of things. And this is still early, but there are, for example, people who are trying to solve that problem, because installing sensors all over your factory or your site when it was not designed for that is costly. And then how do you feed these sensors electricity so that you're having sensors that feed off the radio waves and right. Solutions for all those things? But those are early days. So the ideal situation where you want to be is that you have all these sensors and this data coming either by cables or Wi-Fi or whatever to a central repository, so that then you can do at least analytics and predictability based on that. If you want to run things and actuate, like I said on this case of the oil and gas, you need to add some other actuating devices to be able to control your PLCs and other things. So it's all over the place. It depends where you are on your digitization roadmap.
And Mike, we talked earlier about you actually look for a hardware component in many of your investments, certainly not all of them. Yep. Can you talk a little about what that means and why that's important here?
Well, so for us, obviously we make big, complex things, and it's about how do you make that more efficient. How do you connect to the physical layer? In modeling and sim, you can control which way the wind blows. You can control the temperature. You can control when it rains. But in our world, you can't control those things. So you need to really have the hardware and infrastructure, and not just hardware around chips and storage, but also additive manufacturing, robotics, things along those lines. So as we're thinking about our solution set, we're investing in additive, advanced materials. So when we say hardware, I'm very much thinking beyond just CPUs, right? It's about the whole hardware stack and how you actually implement that into the physical reality.
Great, that makes a lot of sense. And on the edge computing topic, we talk a lot about artificial intelligence here at the conference. We have a number of panels, a number of companies on that topic. One of the things I've heard yesterday is some of these AI companies just want access to the data. They're like, look, we have a lot of smart data scientists, we have a smart technology, maybe we have a little bit of domain knowledge, not as much as any of the corporates we work with. Just give us access to the data, and we'll build something interesting. We'll build some interesting algos, and we'll have some output. And I think what we're hearing from the client side, from the customer or corporate side is, that's not ready. We don't have the data all together, or we're not willing to give that to a startup. So I was curious if anyone wanted to kind of opine on how true is that, and kind of what's going to break that kind of logjam.
I can start if you want. It's absolutely true. First of all, that I think, especially as we've gone into a cloud computing first world, our data, even at a department level, is sitting in all of these various clouds. And so in order to get access to that data to make intelligent decisions off of it and to run AI and ML, honestly, for some organizations, it can take years to even figure out where that data is residing, let alone a quick fix in order to be making intelligent AI-based predictions on top of it. Then, on the other side of the coin is the debate of what's more important? Is it the algorithm that you're using in your AI ML, or is it the data set that you're using in your AI ML? And there's two schools of thought on this. I happen to fall in the middle. I think both are extremely important. I've noticed recently that perhaps for the first time in 50 years, in the past 3 or 4 years, we're really seeing advancements in the AI and algorithmic capabilities that are written to look at these problems, which is a very good first step. But I do think ultimately it comes down to data. And being a platform that can process vast amounts of data with AI and ML to build intelligence is really critical. So it's not the horse or the carriage, it's really that you need both to make AI ML work. And seeing the algorithms improve and seeing people get more comfortable with where their digital data resides and how to use it, we're in the fourth inning or so of that, and it's got a long way to go, but it's definitely going to open up this market in a pretty big way.
To add to that, I have to agree completely with you. I don't know. I'm not a baseball expert, so I don't know in what inning we are in. But on that
Go
thing,
Red Sox.
on that thing about the data, I totally agree with you, because we're all focusing, and rightly so, on the AI part and the benefits that that could bring. But the enabler of that is data, and at the moment, in most cases, if you don't know where you are, you're even more behind. But it's disorganized, it has a lot of anomalies, it's not clean, it's not usable. Data scientists today spend 80% of the time collecting and organizing and cleaning up the data, and 20% analyzing that instead of doing it the reverse, 20% just putting the data together and 80% playing with it. But there are solutions. Full disclosure, I invested in one company doing that. There's a company, for example, called Element Analytics that gathers all the data into a data lake, organizes, looks for anomalies, cleans the data up, and puts it in a format that is usable for the data scientist. So those solutions are coming, but that is one of the obstacles for this AI revolution of automation to be real, the data part of things. But solutions are coming for that.
Great. And Mike, maybe a question for you. I know you guys have made 25 plus investments. I was looking through your portfolio prior to this talk. There's a number in the US, but there's a number in kind of the UK, Australia, doing a more global focus. Where do you kind of see from a geographical standpoint?
Yeah, so what we're finding from a global perspective, so we have offices in 65 countries, so I can basically touch anybody out there and figure out what's going on in the market pretty quick. And for example, in the UK, what we're finding that's pretty unique is the companies are much more mature. There's a lot of government money that can get them to cash flow positive before they're even starting to think about scaling money. And a lot of them are family businesses. So I'll say the ecosystem for venture capital investing there is a little different than here in the States. With regard to Australia, for example, I would say that they are starting to get a lot of visibility. There's a lot of VC money going into Australia right now. The big question always is with companies coming out of Australia is whether or not they're global or they're just regional companies, and whether or not you're going to get to play there. But there is a lot of money going down into Australia right now because they're starting to see that there is some global companies that are coming out of Australia.
Got it. Harry, what about your perspective kind of on the global? Like how much of that innovation do you see, startups and otherwise, is kind of US-based, Europe-based, other geographies?
That's a very good question. So the biggest innovation ecosystem in the world is the US. And the US spends about $130 billion a year in startups. The second one is China. China is about $110 billion a year in startups. You could argue that given the PPP parity, those 110 billion is like 150 billion worth of US money. So China and the US are the biggest innovation ecosystem. And if you look at the unicorns and the world-class companies, most of them come from China or the US. A world-class company coming out of Europe is an exception, but there are. So the biggest is US, China. As a region, Europe comes third. As a country, Israel comes third. Bigger than UK or Germany or any other single country, and then everybody else is a bit behind. What you have to look is, I agree on Australia. You have to look at what specific things happen in one country that you could have a lot of innovation in that particular country. Let me explain to you something. Israel, because of its nature, its neighbors, its military that is very small but very sophisticated, they have a lot in cybersecurity, surveillance, these sort of things, because they have the knowledge. They have the understanding. They've used it for military purposes that can be redeployed for industry and other things. So those companies will be world-class coming out of there. Australia, we are looking at solar companies, because in Australia, we complain here in California how much we pay for electricity. In Australia, it's 3 times more. And they have a lot of sun. So solar companies are booming in Australia. So you have an ecosystem there where you can have world-class companies that can dominate the world coming out of Australia. So that's another indication of where you should invest. So is there some specific thing that you say, okay, in that country, this can flourish, and I'm going to go and look for those or invest in those? We have a global mandate. We want to invest globally. We're limited by bandwidth of our team. Most of my team is in the US, so we have made most of our investments in the US. In China, we've deployed $140 million through funds, and we're sitting in the investment committee of those funds, so we're learning what's happening in China. Sure. And eventually, we'll have my own team in China. One thing that I want to say something else, but I forgot. I'll come back to it.
Quick question. Do you think that the Chinese venture capital technologies will ever go outside of China?
That's a great
Or is it just
question.
really important for you to focus on them so you know what the emerging intelligence is?
That's a very good question. I think they can go out of China. For example, China leads in like, for example, mobile payments and WePay and these sort of things.
Yes.
And that could be easily translated to the US. The problem is, because of this rift that we have, we're increasingly moving to a world where we have 2 technology ecosystems, the Chinese one and the Western one. So this might be the case forever, or if the West doesn't consider it core, like payments will be core because you can create a lot of disruption. Telecommunications is core because, Huawei and all those things. But if there's other applications that are not considered dangerous, those Chinese companies could dominate the US. There's something else, now I remember what I wanted to say. Every time we're looking at a company in the West, we say, for sure, there's a Chinese mirror that is trying to do the same thing. Mm. So I use those funds to tell me, I'm looking at a company doing this, and is there anyone in China? Oh, there's these 2 companies. And sometimes the Chinese company is better. So we invest in that one, or we encourage our fund to invest in that one. But then we're playing this game to understand which is the better technology, comparing the both.
Gotcha. I realize we only have a few minutes left here. So there's a number of entrepreneurs I can see in the audience, different investors. They're probably curious, how can they work with organizations like yours in that capacity? So Harry, I know you've been an entrepreneur, you've been an executive, you're now an investor, among other things. What do you look for in a startup leader that you want to work with?
In the leader, in the
leader
person.
itself. Yep.
So first we look not only at the leader itself, but we look at the team.
Sure.
But the team has to be able to have complementary skills that together can guide the company to deliver what they're supposed to deliver. Not one single person has everything. So if the leader is a technology expert, I hope he has somebody that is a good business developer, and so that the team together can do. In the leader itself, we look for, first of all, a lot of energy and passion. You need to have that drive, that hunger, that hustling capability. The second, some sort of domain expertise. Either you know the product, the technology, or you know the customer. You have no idea about the product, but you know those customers, and what are they pain points and how to sell to them. Or you're an expert on that ecosystem or some sort of, so energy, knowledge, a good, smart person that has a good brain and good EQ, right. And a person that we feel we can trust, that has integrity, that is going to, this is a marriage, right? That is going to tell us the truth and tell us the bad things as good as the bad. Once we invest, when they're selling and investing, we understand that fake it before you make it. But once we're part of the family, that they will be open with us and they will tell us all the problems they have for us to be able to really support them. So those 4 things. Gotcha.
And Mike, maybe a different variation of that question. We talk a lot about investors. Are you thesis driven? Are you opportunistic? You got to be a little bit of both. How do you kind of win deals that come through that are super competitive?
Yeah, for us, we're very strategy focused. So we'll understand the markets we want to go after. We'll do an ecosystem scan. We'll understand the best players. But the interesting thing we have is probably 60 or 70% of our deal flow is actually proprietary in-house, where one of our 45,000 engineers has said, I've been working with this company for 6 months. You need to go and talk to these folks. So we actually get an early entrance to these companies. We get to know them. We have relationship, cultural fit, things like that. So usually when we come to the table, we'll compete with the regular VCs just fine.
And then Sarah, what do we have to look forward to? Like, there's different catalysts in different markets. We talk about maybe industry standards, just regular RFPs, certain startups that are breaking out. What do you kind of see on the horizon, either from one of those catalysts or kind of a white space you're super excited about?
I think there's a lot to be excited about in this field, and the catalysts on the horizon are countless. I mean, the first is that we're getting much more comfortable with where we're putting our digital data. Once we know where our digital data is and how we can use it, whether it's coming from sensors or not, we're getting the benefit of these software tools like SEMS that can help us look at exactly what the data is trying to tell us. But one of the tipping points, I think, will likely be 5G, which will help get information faster and more rapidly into the system and more readily analyzed. But the other thing is just that it takes time, and we're now at the point where we're seeing industrial companies fully embrace IoT and technology at the edge and thinking of ways to protect their assets, to protect their people, in particular, where they don't need to use their people to do things. And so, one of the biggest catalysts, and I can harken back to the cloud computing days, is just getting to the kind of tipping point where you're seeing enough companies doing it that you start to get worried that you're going to get left behind. In my view as an analyst, that's about 15 to 20% is really where you start to see a tipping point where cutting edge companies start to worry, am I missing something if I'm not deploying this technology? And am I going to fall behind my competitors and potentially lose out? I think we're within 6 months of that, if not 6 months into it. And what's likely to be a year-long period of people just getting more and more comfortable with the usage of IoT and industrial IoT and realizing how critical it is to their performance. So it's 5G, it's comfort levels, which is very similar with the cloud. Technology evolution, of course, helps astronomically, as we noted, knowing where your data is and knowing that the algorithms are getting better and the AI ML is getting superior as well. And also thanks to these guys investing in these companies and getting them off the ground with the right advice and helping them reach potentially global markets and moving ahead. So we're there. Now is the time that you can start to invest and really expect to see a return over the next 5, 6, 7 years.